Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Council Scrutiny Committee. It's good to see Councillor Robertson and Councillor Ritchie here as well. So, welcome back. Hope you get on really well. Agenda item 1, do we have any apologies?
We do, Convener. We've got apologies from Deputy Provost Balfour and from Councillor Ansley.
Yes, thank you. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Members should declare any financial and non-financial interest they have in any item of business at this meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? Agenda item 3, minute of the meeting of Scrutiny Committee held on the 10th of June, pages 2 to 6 in your agenda papers. Can we agree the minute?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Are there any matters arising from the minute? Agenda item 4, rolling action log, and we'll go to Mr. Curry for that.
Thank you, Convener. As you know, the rolling action log sets out any reports that the committee has asked for, sets out when they're to be expected. There's been no updates since the last meeting. Everything is in progress and will be with the committee at the due date. So there's no real updates to this.
Yes, thanks very much, Mr. Curry. Agenda item 5, local government budgets 2025, and it's pages 11 to 17 on your agenda papers. We'll go to Mrs. Templeman.
Morning, everyone. So the report in front of you today is summarising the Accounts Commission's Local Government Budgets 25-26 briefing paper. This is part of 3 main reports that the Accounts Commission will publish on an annual basis. Those are set out on paragraph 4.1 and page 12 of the report. The covering report just pulls out some of the summary information and focuses on some of the improvements that the Accounts Commission have said that they would like to see nationally in terms of the budget reports and the way that budget information and financial information is presented both to members and public. Those are messages that are to be looked at nationally. They're based on a review of 10 local authorities' papers. We weren't one of the 10 whose papers were reviewed. And what I would say is that we are always looking at how we can improve our budget reports and our financial strategy report. And if members have any particular areas they would like us to have a look at, we're always welcome to get that feedback. So the briefing report also provides some general information about the picture nationally for budgets, including the pressures, levels of funding support, those kind of main areas. And those kind of messages are pretty similar across all Scottish local authorities. So I'm hoping that when members have read a lot of that section, they'll have recognised some of that information from the information that were provided in our budget report and our financial strategy. And so that includes the pressures and assumptions around things like pay settlements, inflationary pressures, council tax and flat cash funding settlements. So section 6 of the report, the covering report, which starts on page 14, sets out some of the information for revenue. The paper from the Accounts Commission does set out the gaps across Scotland nationally, and you'll see that on page exhibit 5 of the Accounts Commission report, which isn't included in the cover report, but that does show the budget gaps for 25-26 as a percentage of the total revenue budget, and that does show Falkirk as having the highest percentage in Scotland. Now that does exclude Orkney and Shetlands. But one of the things that I would flag, and which is flagged in the report itself, is that it is very difficult to make meaningful comparisons across Scotland. And the reason for that is because all local authorities will make different assumptions and will present their financial information in a different way. And I think that's really one of the main parts of the Accounts Commission report, which is focused on trying to reduce those differences and trying to make all the papers more comparable So that's something that as a Director of Finance section meeting we'll continue to work on. We are obviously mentioned in the paper in terms of our council tax increase for 25-26, also in terms of some of the assumptions around fees and charges. And the other thing that I would flag in terms of the sort of main thrust of the report is that request from the Accounts Commission to improve how we consult with communities. So the Accounts Commission have been fairly consistent in their suggestions that we improve how we consult with communities. At our budget report, in March, we did make further commitments to look at how we consult, and we've already started to do some budget consultation this year, and we'll be aiming to do some after the financial strategy comes to the October Council as well. So we're certainly trying to take the messages from this report and incorporate those improvements into our planning and processes.
Okay, thanks very much, Mrs. Templeman, for that overview of this high-level document. And we'll now go to Councillor Binney.
Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Amanda, for reading the report. I just really want to highlight on consulting with the communities, as we all know, it's very important, and involving them regarding local services in relation to our budget decisions, what you've already said, and you've touched on this a little, and I appreciate that. However, can you advise how this is strategically managed and also collated and also measured, and how can we make sure its reach is enough to say we consult with our communities well, and the Account Commission is satisfied regarding this? Thank you.
Mrs. Templeman.
Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Councillor Binney. I think I might have missed one of your questions, so if I don't answer it, just please let me know. So we, as I say, when we were at the budget meeting, we sort of reaffirmed our commitment to improving how we consult with communities, and obviously we've had the community engagement strategy developed, and so I have a budget engagement working group, which is myself, the comms and marketing team, and the communities engagement team, and we've been looking at how we approach budget consultation, how we continue to improve what we do. So as you know, last year we did ward-based sessions, face-to-face sessions, where chief officers went out to each ward, provided some information, and had the opportunity, and communities had the opportunity to ask questions. And at the same time, we had a survey going through Participate Plus, which is our main consultation platform. The sessions last year weren't well attended on the whole. And so we've been working with the budget engagement group to say, well, how could we do that differently? So at the moment, what's been happening is that our CLD workers have been going out to existing community groups and engaging with them. We have a proposal, we're developing the current budget consultation that, as I say, we would aim to go live with after Council considers financial strategy in October. That would be a mix of going through Participate Plus, but also further engagement between with our CLD colleagues, community learning development, and existing community groups. And then we are also discussing with the Director of Education how we improve our young people engagement for the budget, and how we can design some sessions that will focus specifically on, particularly I think probably the upper sort of secondary cohort within our schools. So I think budget engagement is the type of thing that is going to be an ongoing improvement process. I think we're always looking for ways that we can do it better. We're always open to suggestions on that. I think we're developing or trying to improve the information that we put on the website that's accessible to everyone. We're trying to improve some of the information we can put out on social media to provide some messages. And also we're trying to really sort of, I can't think of the right word, but make sure the message is out there about Participate Plus and using that platform to be able to engage with the council as well. So it's, I think that's, I suppose the other thing that you had mentioned was about how is it measured. One of the big benefits of Participate Plus is that we can publish the outcome from our consultation in Participate Plus, and we've been doing that to date. So we have published a number of sort of, here's what you said as part of those consultation exercises. But certainly for this round of consultation that we have planned, our aim is to finish that around December time, and that gives us enough time to incorporate the learning from that into the budget in March. Thank you.
Councillor Binnie?
No, thank you for that, Amanda. I'm really pleased to hear where that's all the initiatives we're taking. I think maybe where I come from is like, what is the parameters for the Account Commission? What are they looking at? The amount of participation? That I don't understand. And I suppose, and we are increasing it, and I'm really pleased about that. But really, it was about that. What are they looking for? Are they looking for 20% of the population to engage, or what? Basically, that was my question. Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Temple.
Thank you. Yeah, that was the bit that I didn't scribble down in time. I don't think we have real clarity on what they're looking for in terms of actual sort of like a target percentage. And actually, as a Directors of Finance network, that's the type of thing. So we have, for example, Audit Scotland come to our section meetings. We sometimes have the Accounts Commission, and these are some of the questions that we pose to them. And at the moment, the Accounts Commission have got a consultation out in terms of the work of the Commission going forward, and some of the areas they plan to focus on, and we're able to, Directors of Finance are sort of designing a response or drafting a response to that, which does talk about that kind of issue in terms of what is it that the Accounts Commission are really looking for with some of these recommendations. I suppose if we go back to the March meeting, ultimately there was a view that for some of the proposals that came forward, there was a view that we hadn't done enough consultation with affected groups, or we hadn't done enough to understand the impact that the proposal may have on affected groups. And so when we're looking at the consultation this year, one of the messages that myself, the Communities Engagement team and the Qualities team are really clear on is that this is the opportunity to make sure that we understand the impact of some of what we're proposing, and that we are really clearly articulating that in the proposals that are coming forward to members for consideration in March. So I think there's something, there is that question about what Accounts Commission are looking for nationally, but I think it's also about making sure that we are designing that consultation so that it's meeting our needs and our community's needs, and giving the members the information that they need to be able to make the decisions.
Thank you, Amanda.
Okay, thank you. We'll now go to Councillor Patrick.
Thank you, Amanda. That was very, very useful, and I think, but I think there's a step maybe leading on from that, and I wondered about what do we deal with for the actual feedbacking once we've made the decisions. I think again that's an issue which we've probably all found after a budget, that we're then approached by constituents who's asking you about why. So I think that's the other step at the other end, and sometimes it's just explaining why we've had to make a really difficult decision, but on other occasions there's actually very, very good and quite simple reasons, and people are getting very worked up about things which actually, if you went back to them now, we'd be going, oh yeah, that's not turned out to be what I was worrying about. So I think it's that two-part, isn't it? It's the sort of initial consultation, but we then decide, but how do we go back to explain what we've decided, but why? Is that something which is any thoughts been given to as well in your group?
Yes, I think that the budget engagement group have been thinking about that. I suppose there's the informing piece. So trying to make sure that our communities understand the challenges we're facing and why we are bringing some of these difficult decisions forward, and why why we ended up with a significant council tax increase. So I think, and also putting that in the context of, we don't now have the highest council tax in Scotland, but we had the highest rise in 25-26, and I think there's confusing, those are quite confusing. Those can be quite confusing messages. People can hear one thing and assume something else, and so I think there is a piece of work about. At the moment, we're focusing on that informing piece. How do we set that scene for people, and how do we set it in a way that's accessible for them? And I think our comms and marketing team have been coming up with some really good ideas about some of the sort of bite-sized messaging that we can give to try and just home in on a couple of key points to set that scene. As I say, in terms of consultation, we've got the Participate Plus and putting the outcomes for Participate Plus, making sure we're publishing those reports and making sure that the people that have engaged with us through Participate Plus know that that report's there. I think in terms of our budget report, we need to be better at saying we engaged on this proposal, here was the feedback, and here's what may have changed as a result, or if we haven't changed something, why we haven't changed something. I think we need to be setting that out. But I think you're right, once the decisions are taken, I think we need to, for 26-27 budget, we're looking at how do we then put some key messages out. Now, our comms team do a bit of work on with us to do that, but I know certainly for 25-26, there was a lot of emails and a lot of questions coming direct to myself, for example, to try and get a better understanding of where we were. So I do think for 26-27, that will be quite a critical part of that budget engagement group's work. At the moment, as I say, we're focused on that sort of informing piece and designing the consultation, but I think that'll be the next stage.
No, thank you. It's useful to know that's been looked into.
Thank you. We'll now go to Councillor McCabe.
Thank you, Convener. Couple of questions to Amanda and possibly Kenneth. Looking at the Accounts Commission report, which is included within the documentation, straight away, I mean, I look at it and it says that we've got 15.2 billion funding from the Scottish Government across all local authorities. And yet the council's approved net revenue budgets are 18 billion. So there's an immediate shortfall there. Can I ask what we are doing to push back to the Scottish Government about that shortfall? How do we challenge that? I would suggest to you this is not the first year that we've had Accounts Commission's reports like this showing a budget shortfall in funding. I'm struggling to find out how we are ever going to get out of the problem of being underfunded and yet still provide the services which a lot of times we're actually statutorily required to provide. I'd just like a wee bit of feedback on what your thoughts are on how we push back, or are we pushing back to the Scottish Government?
Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Councillor McCabe. I suppose, first of all, just in terms of that 18 billion, so that will include the revenues that come from council tax. So I suppose that's sort of saying that, because once we've set our budget, that is the budget. So the budget will have to balance. So that will be the sum of all the funds that are available. And I think you can see that breakdown in section 2 of the Accounts Commission report. So that's the difference between the 18 billion and the 15 billion. I think if I maybe just start in terms of the council, the funding issue, I suppose fundamentally, as you know, fundamentally there's a huge call on public sector budgets across all areas. And realistically, the way that that gets better is for the economy to grow, for there to be more tax receipts, and for there to be more money available for public funding. And we've said that before in various budget meetings, that that's the reason that the health of UK PLC is really important to us, because that it has a direct impact. So hopefully we will see that shift in the economy. Until that point, we have to plan as best we can using the best sort of assumptions that we have, and so we look at economic forecasts. We look at what we think might mean for funding going forward. And at the moment, we do take quite a prudent view. So we assume sort of flat cash settlement. We don't assume we're going to see an increase in our settlement, and that's sort of based on some of the economic advice we're getting in terms of the pressures that are on governments nationally, Scottish Government and UK Government, to spread their funding, but also, we recognise that areas such as NHS are quite often a little bit more protected than local government can be. So we take an approach to assume flat cash. Now, at the same time, from a director's finance point of view, we work really, really closely with COSLA. We know that COSLA do their budget lobbying and design documents to try and emphasise the huge amount of work that local government does, the huge amount of areas that we contribute to, and the pressures that we are facing. And there has been, I think, for 25-26 budget and for 26-27, there has been much earlier sort of engagement starting between COSLA and Scottish Government to look at those budgets. And we also have opportunities where some of the directors of finance from the executive committee will go to committees within Scottish Government and present evidence as part of their budget preparations. And then finally, we also have some discussions with civil servants about Falkirk specifically, or every chief finance officer will be having some discussions with civil servants about their own specific councils and the pressures that they face. So I think we are really doing a lot of work to try and make our position very clear, and to make sure that there's an understanding of the pressures that we're facing and the potential implications of that. But I think the issue is that there's not enough funding circulating for public service.
I might just come in briefly. Thank you, Provost, and thank you, Councillor McCabe. In essence, Amanda's covered it. Low economic growth, relatively high taxation, and public services under pressure. I think one of the really difficult things is that there is no sign of economic growth improving in the short to medium term. So I suppose, and Amanda's covered the issue around about the lobbying, but the fact is there is simply not enough money to go around. And of course, the other sectors, the universities, the college, NHS, police are lobbying as well. So I suppose for us as a council, if we're looking over that 5-year time horizon of the financial strategy, and with an updated financial strategy coming forward in October, and for all that we have taken some significant decisions over the last number of years in terms of savings, in terms of transformation, in terms of council tax, most recently, we still face a really significant gap. And I suppose looking ahead, my concern is that whilst we have identified quite a lot of savings moving forward, particularly for 26-27, it kind of tails off a bit after that. So we're, even with significant council tax rises, if we are able to do that, and if as councillors and as a council we decide to do that, we do need a lot of additional savings. And I think that that must mean significant changes in how
savings are being delivered. Now, members a couple of years ago in financial strategy approved the target operating model, which opened up various options and potential for new sorts of savings. I think the area that we're getting into nationally now, so this is all councils, is into that space of shared services. So are there services that are being provided 32 times in Scotland, which actually could be provided once for Scotland, or could they be provided regionally or in other combinations of councils to produce savings? That will also have an impact on employment, clearly, and we need to bear that in mind. The history of shared services suggests it's really difficult to get it over the line. I think politically, as much as anything, and historically, councils have been happy to share services as long as they're the ones that are kind of hosting for others rather than the ones that are passing the service over. But so that's just one example that members know from a couple of briefings that we've been doing some work with McMahonshire over the last few months, and that will also come forward to council later in the year to look at some of these possibilities. With that and other more radical forms of transformation or change, or actually getting into a position whereby there's that debate about what really is statutory and how can we make savings in some of these difficult areas. That's all to come, because that longer term solution round about improved economic growth, greater taxation income, and therefore more investment in public services, I do think that's happening in the next 5 years.
Thank you to you both for the very honest answer. I really appreciate it. It doesn't fill me with great confidence that we're going to see the sun over the horizon anytime soon. I think we've already, as councillors, exhibited the fact that we are prepared to make difficult decisions. I mean, having the highest council tax rise, I'm perfectly at ease to defend that. We did it for all the right reasons. But as you quite rightly said, Amanda, when it's portrayed as the highest council tax, when it's not, the reason we had the highest increase is because we were not the highest council tax. So, I think I'm prepared to make the tough decisions. Where I really struggle, though, and I do accept, it is the UK PLC, if you like, it's the whole economy. Kenneth used the term, the money is just not there. I understand that, but at the same time, we as councillors, local authorities are being asked to charge people more and more money for less and less service provision. I'm a wee bit worried, a wee bit concerned about you talking about sharing of services. Some of you may be aware that I'm trying to call an emergency meeting of council to do with the IJB and how we operate within the requirements of the IJB. And what I consider is a lack of control that councillors and the council have in that. It's a wee bit worrying for me, but I digress a wee bit on that. A couple of wee specific questions, Amanda, if you don't mind. It's on council's budget revenue budget. In cash terms, Falkirk Council has the 6th highest gap in Scotland. Can you give me any idea why that would be the case?
I think
tough question, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor McCabe. I think there'll be lots of different reasons for it. Now, part of it will be, for example, that historically low council tax and the fact that we've had that for a very extended period of time. And so, we had calculated before a number of years ago that if we had council tax that matched the highest council tax in Scotland, we would have got something like an extra £10 million a year. And if you think about that every year over 10, 15 years, you know, that historical accumulation adds up. And also our fees and charges in some areas were quite low. We talked before about sort of providing some services at a higher level than the statutory need. And so sort of as you're doing both of those things, your finances are diverging. And then also because we had that historically high use of non-recurring reserves in previous years, we've talked before, both as part of the budget and the financial strategy, that if you use reserves in year one, then year two, you're starting with those reserves as a gap already. So, and if you remember correctly, we had a particularly high level of reserves that we used in 24-25, so that's automatically adding to our gap for 25-26. And I am happy that in 25-26 we made a significant reduction in the use of non-recurring reserves. I think that was a really positive step forward, but those will be the kind of main reasons that our position is so high.
Thanks, Amanda. Paragraph 6.12, this worries me a wee bit. The briefing paper highlights pressures on the IJB budgets. Again, it's this thing where budget pressures there externally, which we're not going to be able to do a lot about. And it's a concern of mine, personal concern of mine, that we don't have as much influence as I would like to see on how the IJB operates their budget. They're an arm's length organisation. We don't have a lot of input into it, if anything at all, which really worries me. I think that just about finishes me, Amanda, Kenneth. Thanks for your answers. One wee thing, if you could just explain to me again, we're talking Higgs boson here, economics, whatever, just loses me. The identity, it's on the Accounts Commission report, page 5, where they've identified £647 million as the identified revenue budget gap. Why is that that 647 when, again, me being very simple, 15.2 billion, 18 billion is actually a 2.8 billion shortfall. What's the difference between those two figures? Why 647 when in actual fact it's 2.8 billion? And then, sorry, just to finish it off, Amanda, that £647 million identified revenue budget gap is obviously made up of the actions to bridge the gap. So those total figures, they all add up to that 647 million. I was just wondering, actions to bridge the gap, is this the Accounts Commission recognising this is these actions to bridge the gap? Is this the Accounts Commission recognising that this is what local authorities have done? Yeah. So we've increased council tax 275 million. Yeah. So all that totals up to 647 million. That's great. What's the difference then between that identified revenue budget gap to the 2.8 billion shortfall? I'm saying, yeah. Get me? Almost.
Thanks, Councillor McCabe. I think if we're talking about the total revenue budget for local government is 18 billion, and I think as we talked about, that is made up, and I can't remember what page I said. Sorry, I'll just go to it quickly. That is made up of 11 billion of funding from Scottish Government, 3 billion from non-domestic rates, 3 billion from council tax, and 1 billion from other income. So that's what makes up that 18 billion of budget. But, and as we know, all local authorities have to set a balanced budget. So the 647 comes from when local authorities just as we present ourselves, we say this is what we assume our costs are going to be, this is what we assume our income is going to be, and this is the gap that we have. And so effectively the 647 is that gap at national level. And then we say, just as you've pointed out, what savings will we approve? What fees and charges will we increase? What council tax might we increase beyond what we had assumed to balance that gap? And so, you know, councils nationally are working incredibly hard to identify savings, transformation projects that can try and reduce their funding gaps and make services more sustainable. And so 647 million will be a combination of those savings and additional revenue.
Okay, thanks very much. Really appreciate your input there. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McCabe. I'd just like to make an observation. 31 to 32 councils completed an equality impact assessment as part of the budget setting process. I think it was good to see that. And over the past couple of years, certainly in Falkirk here, we've increased the EPIAs that we're producing and quality EPIAs. So it's good to see that trend. I think it's an important part of the budget setting process that everybody's got all the information they need to make informed decisions. I just wanted to ask a bit about ring fence grants. It says they were moved to general revenue grants, however, conditions relating to the funding remain in place. So the funding remains ring fence in reality. Do you think we'll ever get to a point where the ring fence grants will be baseline so we could use them for other purposes?
Thanks, Provost. I suppose that maybe in part goes back to some of the comments that Councillor McCabe was making about those negotiations between COSLA and Scottish Government, the lobbying that we're doing. And there has been a push to try and reduce the amount of ring-fenced grants that we're receiving. I think the point that maybe has been made in the Accounts Commission report is that whilst technically some ring-fence grants were added to the general revenue grant and were baselined, all the conditions associated with that funding remains in place. We still need to deliver that policy. Now, arguably, what it could mean is that if we could find a way to deliver that policy a bit more in a bit more of a cost-effective way, then that maybe would provide resources to go elsewhere. But so the kind of grants that were talked about were things like, for example, for early years. So that funding is quite difficult to sort of try and do something different with. I think the challenge is, I think part of the challenge with the ring fencing in the past, and part of the reason it's become a bit of a touch point, is because quite often what may happen is that if, for example, a council's given £1 million to deliver something in year one that will cost £1 million, because we've up until 25-26 we've had these sort of flat cash settlements, what that means is in 5 years' time the cost may be £2 million, but the council will still only be getting £1 million. And that means that £1 million, because we have to deliver that policy, has to be found elsewhere, and that adds to our funding pressures. And I think the ask from COSLA, from local authorities, is for us to have more flexibility and to make some of those decisions for ourselves. The only thing I would caution around that is that still would mean difficult decisions, because effectively what it would mean is we'd be saying that a service that we're currently delivering, if we're given flexibility and we say, well, actually that area is not the same priority for us, it's still about reducing service provision potentially. So it's not an easy fix to stop ring fencing the grants.
Okay. Yeah, another question that's on page 21 of the report is that councils, however, continue to benefit from reduced pension costs. Who is that?
Thanks, Provost. So every year the pension committee has, every 3 years the pension committee has evaluation to see if it's more likely than not to have enough funds to meet the pension benefits that it has to pay out. And in the last few years, pension funds generally have become healthier and have got to a stage where most funds are assessed as being more likely than not to be able to have enough money to pay their benefits. So it's because they're such long-term funds, you're sort of looking 20 years in the future. So it's all, you know, it's an actuarial valuation that's done. But what that did for a lot of pension funds at the last valuation, which was in 2023, was it allowed pension funds to reduce the contributions that employers had to make towards the pension fund. So it reduced the employers' contributions. Now, we did see that in Falkirk as well. Falkirk Council Pension Fund reduced the contributions for a number of employees, including Falkirk Council, Clackmannanshire Council and Stirling Council. And so that benefit flows through to the general fund because the general fund had to pay less in employers' contributions. And so we are starting our triennial valuation work now for the fund. It's a huge exercise, but our contributions are set for 3 years at a time. So the next change in contributions would be 27-28. So it's not something that will impact the 26-27 budget, but depending on how well the pension fund's doing, we could see a change in 27-28. And then the only other thing I would say is that I think the report refers to Strathclyde Pension Fund. Strathclyde Pension Fund did something a little bit different and took a very significant reduction for 2 years and then a significant increase for the third year. So they were really the only fund in Scotland that took that sort of approach that was quite skewed towards 2 years. But what I would say is Strathclyde Pension Funds was in a very different position. It had been in a much healthier financial position for quite a number of valuation cycles before it took that decision. Whereas for Falkirk, the 2023 valuation was the first year that we had been in such a positive funding position.
And just finally, I know this is a high level document for Scotland, but I just wonder if you restate their budget gap for the next few years.
Thank you, Provost. So what I'm going to do, apologies, just bear with me, is I will refer to the figures that we had in the budget report, which we took to Council in March, but we are in the process of updating those figures because the financial strategy will come to the 2nd of October Council, and that will have updated figures. So in March 2025, including 25-26, we had a 5-year budget gap of 58.5 million. Now, as we've said, the biggest part of that was in 25-26 because of the use of non-recurring funding to such a high level in 24-25. What I'd say is every year we have sort of between £6 and £8 million of cost pressures that we need to identify a way of tackling. So at the moment we're assuming roughly every year our costs will outpace our income by between £6 and £8 million a year. And so that would be the kind of scale of the challenge that we would face once we manage to get this issue about the non-recurring funds being carried forward. If we can get that structural deficit under control, each year we'll have that between £6 and £8 million gap.
Thank you. We'll now go to Councillor Aiken.
So I'm just going to withdraw my question and just leave it till the financial strategy comes forward in October.
Okay. Councillor Aitchison.
Thanks, Provost. I'm Amanda, could you maybe give us a kind of overview on the expenditure on social care services, how you see that going for the next few years, and with that impact on other services in the budget? Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you, Councillor Aitchison. I wonder if maybe I say a few things and then maybe we could bring in Marie Fraser, the Chief Finance Officer for the Health and Social Care Partnership. And if I maybe give that sort of council perspective initially. So I think maybe firstly it's worth saying that the Accounts Commission have done a separate budget briefing on Integration Joint Board budgets, so that is not a huge feature of this document, but there has been separate papers on it. I think nationally there is a lot of concern about the growing pressures on that sector, and I think that that's across health and social care. And so we see that emerging in lots of different ways, but you know, things like, for example, the national insurance increase hit a lot of providers. A lot of those providers will be looking for increases in costs from ourselves. So, but also demand pressures. We've got an ageing population. We've got more people living with more complex health needs. So that drives up cost. I think one of the things that we had referenced in the budget report, and we'll put some reference to in the financial strategy, is that every year the Integration Joint Board produce a business plan for the council to consider, and that sets out where they think they're going to be with their financial pressures and their income. Now, at the moment, the level of income that we provide to the Integration Joint Board, the minimum is set out in Scottish Government financial circulars. So it says we can't provide any less than we provided the year before, and there's certain funding streams that we must pass over. We have an option to provide more if we think that's a good use of our funding, if we want to prioritise that, and if we have the funding to provide. The challenge is, of course, that we are sitting as a council with a significant funding gap. So you know, these are the challenges that we face. In 25-26, we recognised that in the budget, we recognised that the Integration Joint Board business case, I think, had a huge step forward in the business case. I think Gail and Marie really produced a good document. It just felt really positive progress, and it did map out a plan to get the IJB focused on adult social care into a much more sustainable position, recognising that it was going to take a few years to get to that point. And so we recognised in the 25-26 budget that we anticipated we would have to give additional non-recurrent funding to the IJB. And we also recognised in our year-end outturn report for 24-25 that, no, sorry, I'm getting mixed up. We recognised in our executive report, our projection report, which is coming on Thursday to executive, that we had identified some additional funding that we could pass over on a non-recurring basis. So we are working really closely with the IGB on that, and I know that they're still working very hard to try and minimise the need for that additional funding. I don't know if it's maybe worth, Marie's got anything she would want to add to that.
Okay, Mrs. Fraser.
Thanks, Provost. I suppose Amanda was setting out some of the challenges that we've been facing in bringing that medium-term financial plan. So we were really keen to bring in March this year a financial plan that was looking to sustainability over the medium term. So although we've got that gap that Amanda mentioned, so there was a 4 million gap this year, which is recognised by both the council and the NHS as being a risk share. A risk share arrangement this year, and as Amanda said, we are trying hard to minimise that amount that we might have to ask for, and we're monitoring that closely. But over the medium term, so I suppose just to set out some of the pressures, so we recognise pressures of just under 40 million over the next 3 years, including this year. and we identified transformation and efficiency proposals of just under 18 million. So it did still leave us a gap over the medium term of £1.2 million. So over the medium term, that gap was still £1.2 million until year 3. Now we'll have to move that medium term financial plan on a year, so that'll obviously increase the pressures. So we would need to keep recognising efficiencies as we move on. But we're really keen to be moving as much as possible to that sustainable position over the medium term, and we're working really hard to try and deliver those efficiencies and transformations that we've brought forward. Obviously, there are a number of risks, as there are with the council budgets and NHS budgets. So those risks are around demand that Amanda mentioned, that complexity of care that's arising. People are becoming more complex, people are living longer, so that demand rises for us. The pay inflation, as it's a risk for council budgets, it's a risk for us as well. Provider sustainability is a real risk for us as well. The increased employers' NI contributions are being recognised across providers as rising costs that we are not passing on funding in relation to that. We're passing on the Scottish Living Wage funding, which is passported through the council to us from Scottish Government. And even then, that's not enough to cover our Scottish Living Wage liability. So we're recognising that as a pressure as well. There are a number of job evaluations going on as well, which we've recognised. So the carers have been re-evaluated. So that's increased costs on a recurring basis as well for the partnership. And on the NHS side, we have a lot of prescribing volatility, and also the agenda for changes. So the reduced working week for NHS employees is causing a bit of pressure, and we're trying to quantify what that might look like from next year, because there's a further reduction from April next year. So there are a number of areas of risk which we recognise, and we're working hard to try and mitigate those. And then also with the upcoming and updated integration scheme, the children and families budgets will be coming over to the partnership as well. So we need to recognise the risks around that and the pressures around children and families budgets when they come over to the partnership as well. So I'm bringing a budget strategy paper to the next IJB, which is setting out the process through which we'll take the budget, the business case and the medium-term financial plan to bring in March. There's been discussion around consultation and engagement this morning. We're working really hard. We did quite a fair bit of consultation and engagement last year, and we're looking at a lessons learned approach around that as well. So we're asking questions of key stakeholders around how we might improve that. So we're really keen to improve that as well, and to move forward again with that equalities impact assessment process. So I might stop there. That's us just setting out, some of the work that we're doing and some of the risks that are involved there. But absolutely recognising all of what Amanda said as well. But I'm happy to answer any further questions if there are any. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Marie. And apologies for saying your surname is Fraser when effectively it's Kears. So.
That's okay, Provost, no problem.
So, Councillor Aitchison, you any comment?
I totally appreciate it. It's a very, very difficult situation for everybody, and there's more and more people needing social care services. Certainly look forward to the papers coming forward to the IJB. It's not an easy task. I totally appreciate that. I think the way things are going, I think it's impacting on other services within the council as well. That's fine, Provost.
Thanks very much, Councillor Aitchison. Councillor Kelly.
Sorry, I think I'll withdraw my question as well. It was on the strategy for 26-27. So we're getting that in October. I don't see any sense in trying to get it out today. Thanks a lot, Amanda.
Yeah, I just wondered if Amanda could maybe, like an overview of Scotland, how council budget is made up and what options councils have to close their budget gap. Just a kind of summary, because all councils across Scotland are clearly having to do that.
Thank you, Provost. So for most local authorities, as a rough rule of thumb, around about 80% of council's funding will come from government grants. Around 17% will come from council tax, and around 3% so will come from fees and charges. So that's a kind of rough rule of thumb. In terms of the government grant, beyond the sort of lobbying activity that we've already talked about, very little influence over the amount of grant that we get. So the areas that we have under our control is council tax, fees and charges, and reducing the cost of what we deliver, either through transformation, through efficiency savings, through reducing a service, or stopping a service. And those are really the only options that are available to us. I think so we've traditionally worked off that basis of a kind of 80-20 split between the funding we get from Scottish Government and the funding that we generate for ourselves. I think the challenge is that because of that, because of that difference, the 80 and the 20, what that means is that if we increase council tax by 1%, it's not 1% of the council's budget that increases. It's actually a very small percentage of the council's budget that increases via that 1%, and that's quite challenging. And then, as I say, for most, I think we've said before, for most local authorities, around about 80% of spend will go on education and social care, and a huge proportion of the education budget will be on teachers. So there's lots of areas where we're very restricted in terms of the changes that we can make. And so what that means is that there's an increasingly small pool to try and make savings and cost reductions in. But the challenge can be that those can be the areas that really matter to the public. It can be roads, it can be grounds maintenance, it can be the things that we see every day, and waste. But so I think for officers, it's always trying to develop proposals. It's a really challenging scenario because you're always trying to get that balance right between what we can deliver with minimum impact on, what efficiencies and savings we can deliver with minimum impact on service delivery. And as Kenneth said, the target operating model and trying to use the target operating model to develop transformation plans is quite crucial as well to what we're trying to do.
And we wanted to hold on to the service concessions really and not use them if we don't need to, so they can be invested in the future. So you really need to look at what's on the table and kind of focus on closing the gap to the savings rather than using the service concessions.
Yeah, so the service concessions are an opportunity to have funding to invest in our assets. And what we've talked about is again that service concessions are effectively reserve. It's you can only use it once, and if you use so if for example you had a £5 million gap, and for 4 years you decided to fill that from service concessions, at the end of those 4 years you'll have spent £20 million and you'll still have £5 million. So you'll have spent all that money, but you won't be any further forward, really. And I think that's the kind of scenario we're really trying to actively avoid.
Thanks very much. If there's no further questions, Councillor Meiklejohn, Leader of the Council, want to make any comment?
Just very briefly, Provost, and thank you for the opportunity. I think Amanda and Kenneth have got to the crux of the matter. The current economy is very depressed. We're not a growing economy, therefore there's not enough money circulating. And we could spend a lot of time blaming national governments, but that is not necessarily going to actually improve the situation within Falkirk Council. And just by way of context, if you actually look at the Scottish budget, 70% of the Scottish budget is spent on health and local government, which doesn't leave much for the rest. of everything that they have to do, and that includes investment in other areas. So I think we really do need to work hard to try and retain as many services as possible through transformation, look at how we can deliver efficiencies through backroom processes that can be more automated, and enabling the frontline staff to be able to deal with those that are most vulnerable and are in desperate need of our services. And that will involve taking difficult decisions, whether that means difficult decisions around raising council tax. But what will be unavoidable is we will need to make savings elsewhere, which will mean a change in the way we deliver services. And indeed, it will mean there'll be a reduced headcount within the council. And we want to mitigate that as much as possible, and still be able to give opportunities for staff through employment, apprenticeships, and career progression. It does mean that we need to do that. Challenging times ahead of us, and kind of very clearly articulated that this isn't going to be a one-year solution, it's not going to be a 2-year solution, it could be a longer-term solution, and that's just where the national economy is, not just the Scottish economy, but national economy is at the moment. Falkirk has a good plan. The financial strategy is the route map to getting to financial sustainability, and if we're able to follow that, then we will be in a better position to be able to invest using service concessions. But as the economy does start to recover, there'll be some opportunities that we'll be able to take up and not rely on additional income, just backfilling the gaps that are left through non-recurring savings.
Very much, Councillor Meikle-John. So we've had quite a good discussion on the high-level report, piece some things out. It's difficult for every council across Scotland, not just in Scotland, but other nations there doing the same. They're going through the same process. And I think, as Councillor Meikle-John has said, it's economic downturn that's going to have that impact on that as well. So I think we've had a fairly reasonable discussion on the budget, and I'd like to thank everyone for their contributions. We'll now take a 10-minute comfort break before we go to the next agenda item. Thank you. So, welcome back, everyone. We'll now move on to agenda item 6, Standards and Quality Report 24-25. This is the education report, pages 18 to 71 on your agenda papers. And we'll go to Jill Pringle. Thank you, Jill.
Thanks, Provost. So this paper introduces Education Services Annual Standards and Quality Report. The Education Service and our Annual Standards and Quality Report fulfills our statutory requirement to report on progress of the service. It is a high-level report, hopefully highlighting some really strong practice across our service and across our schools. It is a report which we're really proud of. We're really proud of all the work that sits within it. Just a couple of things to point out within the report. There's obviously a section on attainment that sits at the back. The best time in education is to report on attainment is in March. That's when we got all the final level attainment that we're able to publish and report on. So the attainment that sits within this report is from March just past, and that's reporting at the next possible stage. There will obviously be an opportunity to then report on attainment again fully in March 2026. And the most recent attainment, which was part of the SQA results, will form part of that next March reporting. So the attainment within this is from March that has just passed, again highlighting some very strong progress. The other thing I wanted to point out was the fact that we've got a spotlight element to this standards and quality report. Now, what the spotlight element does is highlights individual practice in some of your local schools. It is an opportunity for everyone to engage with schools and the high quality practice and the good practice that they are showcasing. Just in terms of the report itself, although it is a statutory requirement, it's one of the few opportunities we get to showcase the entire work of the service. It is something that we are going to try to use better to try and communicate our successes and to try and get people to engage with local schools in our service in a more meaningful way. I think in the past, for the past couple of years, the report has been predominantly electronic. And what we have done through a little bit of feedback is found that we're maybe not getting as wide a reach as we would normally like to have, which is why we made the decision this year to produce a paper copy. So yourselves as councillors all have paper copies, and we've also produced enough to give a paper copy to every school, so that can sit in foyers, etc. And again, it's about engagement and about celebration of the service and all the high quality work we're starting to see come out of our service. So I hope you enjoy it. We're very proud of the work that sits within it. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jill. We'll first of all go to Councillor Aitken.
Just a couple of questions. So the gap between attendance rates for the most and least deprived pupils in the primary sector has increased since 2019-20. Just wonder if you could give us some examples as to why it's increased and what has been done to combat this.
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, so I'm just trying to find the specific part. I mean, I think throughout COVID, we saw increases in absence rates, etc., and we have subsequently put in significant work to try and improve on that, particularly through our strategic equity fund work. We have a real focus on attendance, particularly for most children from most deprived backgrounds. So we did notice where there were areas where we had gaps to do with attendance, and we have put significant spotlight on that to try and improve outcomes for those groups. We are seeing improvements in these areas. We are starting to see things pick back up again, and obviously school by school, there are some schools where they've not seen gaps. Sorry, start again. It's quite difficult with aggregated data to look at specifics, because what you'll find is within an aggregated data set at a local authority level, there's real school-based nuance. So you might find one school that's got a real strength, which at an aggregated level would be cancelled out by a school that's got a real area for improvement. So part of the work that we're also doing to try and improve on these areas, even improve on these gap areas, is to actually look at individual schools. So we're interrogating the data an awful lot more. We're actually identifying specific areas where we really do need to put a laser focus. And then schools are working with us to look at individual interventions for, in some cases, individual children basis, to try and really work on that aggregated improvement. But we are starting to see improvement across the board from what we've seen through COVID times. We're starting to see things pick up and normalise again. And that is again through a range of things, both at school level and at local authority level.
That's great, Jill, thank you. And the second part to my question is the attendance rate for the most deprived pupils and pupils with ASN has remained the same for 2 consecutive years. Can you maybe just explain why that's stalled and again what we're doing to combat that?
Again, it's quite difficult to look at a specific subset of a group of children and young people, because what you'll find in year one, you're talking about a group of young people, and then the second year that you're looking at, that the cohort might change. So you might have a different group of ASN children within that group that might have a different set of needs. But that's why the sort of the interrogation of the data and the tracking and monitoring is so important. So it's essentially about the quality assurance processes that sit around the schools and sit around our work, that mean that we're able to intervene on a pupil by pupil level, which will improve on those outcomes for young people. Specifically for ASN cohorts, again, that's difficult to comment on in the specifics, because again, it might be different children every year which have a different need. But again, we're starting to see things really improve as a result of the sort of robust quality assurance processes and the targeted interventions at a pupil level in the schools, especially for young people from deprived areas and with an additional support need, but also at local authority level with our strategic work as well.
That's great, Jill. Thank you so much for that.
Okay, thank you. I'll just bring in Deborah Davison.
It's just really to add to what Jill had said in relation to ASN. Obviously, within ASN, we've got different cohorts of young people, some who are impacted attendance through their health, through their additional support need that is preventing them from attendance, and genuinely we cannot improve on. But linked to the work of our services, our ASN team, in relation to anxiety, well-being, that has had an impact on attendance post-COVID, as Jill had said. So there is quite a targeted focus on within education service and well-being, but also the wider children's services partnership to support those with more emotional and social challenges to help improve attendance. So different cohorts are impacted by different things, but certainly we're working again, as Jill said, with individual schools, and we've got specific areas of priority improvement across our services to tackle the key areas within additional support needs that we know are impacting, and we're seeing an impact of that through some of the work, the targeted work that's been done.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now go to Councillor Kelly.
First of all, this is a fantastic book that you've produced. I'm just wondering, what's the cost of that, to the rather than the plain sort of edition of it?
Beg your pardon, sorry, Councillor Kelly, speaking to you without my microphone on. So essentially, in the past, as I said at the start, we didn't actually have paper copies at all, and we took the decision this year to produce a more published version through Falkirk Council Printworks, to better publicise and advertise the work of the service. We spent £650 on it in total to try and basically provide copies enough for yourselves and our schools. And we felt that yourselves and our schools were the people who are most likely to engage with members of the public and stakeholders around the content of what is sitting within this. So we felt that that would make it the most accessible version for that kind of interaction and engagement. I did say as part of the report that we would review that. We did take it as a one-off decision this year to see if it would have an impact to encourage people to engage with the work of the service, because we were seeing with the digital versions that it maybe wasn't reaching where we needed it to reach in terms of impact. So that was the decision we took this year, but we did say that we would review that if it was something that was felt that was not appropriate. Hopefully it has had the desired impact, and certainly we put one in reception at the stadium a few weeks ago, and just in terms of encouraging people to engage with our service who are visiting the stadium. And we've walked past a few times and there have been people who ordinarily wouldn't manage to have a look at these types of things who've been able to flick through it when they've been waiting for appointments, even through in the other part of the building. So early signs are encouraging in terms of engagement with the positive work of our service. So long story short.
Yeah, excellent. And it's not, I mean, 650 in the scheme of things isn't a lot of money, I understand. Just seemed that it's, I agree, we need paper copies. We lose so much with this Participate Plus. So many people just, you have to be geeks to actually go and look for things, you know, and paper like this, yeah, it's ideal. And then schools, it will hopefully the parents will be picking them up and reading them. So thanks.
Thanks very much. Personally, I found it very helpful to be able to flick through it and cross-reference and stuff like that, easier than if it's in digital format. You know, it's you can see that compares to, it's much, the other physical copy like that I found personally much better. We'll now go to Councillor Binney.
Thank you, Provost. I really want to mention and really highlight, and I'm also delighted about the teachers' reading group. It's a great initiative in introducing teachers to talk about books. I like writing stories myself, I will mention that, so that's why I'm quite enthusiastic about this. But also it'll lead to great enthusiasm within the pupils to borrow books via the LRS, the lending service. So it's a two-part question. Can you advise in the school setting what is the ratio between reading from a digital appliance and a traditional tangible book? Then I'll ask my second question after the second part after the answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Binney. So I don't have the specifics in terms of what the ratio is in terms of use. However, excuse me, sorry. What I can say is that one of the benefits of the one of the things that people will focus on, teachers will focus on, and children and young people will focus on, is the variety of mechanisms within which they can engage with the written word. And I think in terms of how children learn, it's really important that they're offered a variety of mechanisms by which to engage. So at the moment, what we have is high quality engagement through both media. I think there's a lot to be said for traditional books and children feeling books and the touch and the learning that's associated with having a book in their hand. But equally, sometimes the digital aspect provides a greater accessibility to the written word. So for example, if you have iBooks or electronic books, sometimes it's easier to access those very quickly, or the range of books is more accessible through a digital platform. So although I don't have the specific statistics around the breakdown of how people access learning, I think for high quality learning, teaching and assessment, both for children and young people, but also for staff as part of their professional learning, it's really important that we offer both. What I will say is that we are particularly well set up in Falkirk through our connected Falkirk one-to-one devices. And so it does afford us with that extra dynamic around how children and young people access their learning through the digital device. I think one of the things that we have focused on and we will continue to focus on is how digital devices are used as a vehicle to access really high quality pedagogy. It's not just about a tool that you can do a spreadsheet on or produce a Microsoft Word document on. It's about how teachers can be really innovative and creative around the pedagogy of the learning, teaching and assessment that comes through the digital device. So we are really, really, really lucky in terms of that being a really kind of, trying to find the right word, it's a really rich environment for our children to learn in, but it's also a really rich environment for our teachers to teach in. So didn't answer the question in as much as I don't have the specific breakdown of the half and half or what the proportion is, but we really benefit from having both.
Thanks for that, Jill. I really appreciate that, and I do understand we've got that variety, and we are moving to a sort of digital agenda, which is good. I mean, I'm from an age where we didn't have iPads to read from and other appliances. We actually had books. But I suppose with us doing that and having the choices and have the options is good. But, when you do that, you're reading a story and sometimes the stories you're asked questions in exams and things like that. So with regard retention of that story, you read a story, you'd like to know that you've picked it up and you know what the story was. So and this is really quite a big question. How is that measured then, in the sense like if a child reads from a digital appliance, reads a book, and it's the same story, maybe it depends on the child obviously as well. So what is best for that retention of that information, that story, and however they read? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. So essentially that is a story or a conversation around high quality learning, teaching and assessment. So classroom teachers are very well versed at understanding the types of learning that our young people learn best with. So for example, some young people learn better visually, some young people learn better by listening, some young people learn better by moving around the classroom. Our teachers know our young people and children very well. And that's why, again, it's really important to have a variety of sort of learning mechanisms so that every single young person in the classroom can learn. And I think it's not around an aggregated measurement of which is the most successful for retention, because what will happen is every young person will retain information differently. So it might be that one young person retains better by reading a physical book, one young person might learn better by listening to a podcast, which is listening to. One young person might learn better by looking at it in a digital device. A different young person might learn it better by acting it out or teaching it to somebody else. But the best person to understand that on a child by child basis is the classroom teacher. And that's why as a service, we're very keen to provide as many different opportunities and options for our classroom teachers in our schools as possible, to free our classroom teachers up to make those individual decisions on a pupil by pupil basis. Because essentially, the way we improve outcomes for our young people, the way we improve experiences for our young people is make sure that we provide opportunities on a person by person, child by child basis.
Thank you, Jill. That's really very reassuring, and I'm pleased that teachers act it out on the individual child and decide what's best.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Binney. We'll now go to John Reid.
Thanks, Provost. I was just going to add, Councillor Binney, to what Jill said there, just to reaffirm that it's a balance of both in all of our schools. We're very fortunate that each of our secondary schools has an actual physical school library, and that's extensively used across all year groups. We also have a principal librarian within Falkirk Council who works extensively with all sectors, early years, primary and secondary, and a really well-resourced learning resource centre, which provides materials and books to schools as requested. And you'll know, of course, we're really keen on promoting this because every year we have our annual Red Book Awards, which is a big thing in Falkirk, and next year enters in, or this session actually, enters into its 25th year. So it's just to reaffirm that commitment to digital and paper books. Particularly since you've been given a paper copy of the Standards and Quality Report, we recognise how it's nice to have it in your hands.
Thanks very much. We'll now go to Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Provost. I'm looking at page 37 and 38, which spotlights the STEM projects. Just as a bit of background, I have a particular interest and enthusiasm in STEM myself, and when my son was in S3 at Larbert High School, we were encouraged, along with a lot of other parents, to join a STEM family project which ran over a few weeks and involved one evening per week. And we found, both my son and I, the project interesting, engaging, challenging. And one benefit which I hadn't really thought about was that it gave me as a parent and other parents a rare opportunity to see our children in situ, as it were, and work with them. So it was really, really good. So I have two questions, but my first one really relates. These projects identified in the report are good to hear. How are we reaching out to other families to participate in similar STEM projects? Because the more we can reach out to particularly the difficult to reach families, the more benefits they will achieve. So that's my first question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So yes, as you quite rightly pointed out, there are a couple of examples in here that are spotlighting specific STEM projects. And I think STEM is obviously one of the biggest growth areas, technologies, engineering, etc. at the moment, and it is very important for us to engage with stakeholders around what STEM looks like. Most commonly because things are moving so quickly in the STEM arena. So we can teach STEM and we can teach traditional STEM, but what's really important is that we have access to what's happening at the moment, particularly with the likes of technologies, etc. So there's nobody better to discuss what technologies look like than people who are actually actively on the ground doing STEM or working in a STEM or technologies career at the moment. So one of the things we do work through are focusing on STEM partnerships. Now, there's a range of opportunities for schools to engage in STEM activities through things like STEM ambassadors, and that's normally where we've got somebody who is in the industry who engages with schools to talk about their job. We work quite closely in terms of what interdisciplinary learning might look like in school to do with STEM. So again, it's one of these things where there are lots and lots of opportunities, there are lots and lots of initiatives, but for individually for schools, it's about who is best placed in their schools to engage with these types of things and to take it forward. We do have a person within the local authority who is responsible for coordinating STEM opportunities. So we have a development officer who works within Education Scotland to do with sustainability, which sits under the STEM umbrella. And she offers a range of opportunities for schools to engage in sustainability. We also have a digital development officer who has a remit for STEM more generally, and also she is working with schools to try and provide as many and signpost as many opportunities as possible. But one of the things I will say is that what is frequently encouraged is engagement with stakeholders, which our best access is through parents in these jobs, etc. So that is actively encouraged through a range of different curricular areas, but particularly within STEM, whereas we recognise the people with the best education and the best background in these areas are actually working in those areas at the moment. So that's who we need to get in, the young people to learn from.
Thank you for that. My second question really relates very closely to that, actually. One of the best opportunities, obviously, is real life experience, particularly working in situ in locations with businesses. But I'm particularly thinking about Forth Valley College, which, as you will all know, has excellent facilities and can recreate some of the industrial applications that are out there. I just wondered, with the bigger projects, are you progressing activities with different schools to perhaps go to the college and spend a bit of time working on their STEM projects?
Thanks, Councillor. So yes, we are working on our partnership with Forth Valley College at the moment across a range of different aspects. I think at the moment our focus is around basically some of the qualifications we can co-deliver and what that might look like, but also around some of the qualifications that children and young people can progress onto. So I think, for example, of some of the foundation apprenticeships that require work-based learning, etc., we're working on partnership at the moment about how we can work collectively to make sure our children and young people are provided with opportunities, including work-based learning. So again, across the piece, we are working with Forth Valley College around what our partnership might look like. We're also working on a big bit of work within the council at the moment about particularly work placement. So again, we have to understand that sometimes the best education for young people of a certain age is actually being in that particular workplace. So we are spending a bit of time trying to extend our reach about what work experience or what work placement looks like. So historically, work experience used to be a week-long opportunity in at school, whereas now work experience or a work placement is something which should be at an appropriate time and place within a young person's senior phase experience. And that might be working with a partner provider in the STEM industry over, I don't know, every Saturday across 4th, 5th and 6th year to try and ensure that these children and young people get the right opportunities to get work-based learning before they actually apply for jobs or college or university. So I think, yes, we are working in partnership with Forth Valley College around these areas. We're working to get to that stage, but we're also working with a wide range of partners to try and ensure that young people are provided with opportunities, work-based opportunities and STEM-based opportunities at the right time for them within their learner journey.
Thank you, Jill. That's good to hear, and thank you, Provost, as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Flynn. Can I just ask, are we seeing more females moving into science, technology, engineering and mathematics?
So again, I could not tell you the specifics of the numbers of young people progressing into STEM careers at this stage within the local environment, but as a female from a STEM background myself, I was a physics teacher and spent a long time around the sort of the focus on women in STEM. Yes is the answer to that. We are seeing nationally an increase in young numbers of young people uptaking STEM courses. It is becoming more popular and more accessible for women. But I think what's really important about it is about making it accessible for everybody. So for me, sciences in particular is about traditionally it maybe hasn't been as accessible to a range of people, but it's about making it accessible to everybody, whether you are a female, whether you are somebody with an additional support need, whether you are somebody from a deprived background. I think for me that's the importance, is about making it accessible to absolutely everybody, but also making it attractive to absolutely everybody, because I think if people see something that's accessible but don't see the value in it, then they might be less inclined to kind of take that pathway. So it's about providing role models, and it's about providing opportunities and people seeing these role models and opportunities so that they see that as a legitimate pathway. But long story very, very short, yes, we are seeing increases in terms of women and other groups accessing STEM.
That's fantastic. Councillor Rican.
Yeah. Kenny answered what my question was originally going to be with your answer there, but you did specifically mention that the work-based placements were for 4th, 5th, 6th years. In my own experience, the kind of age group between 14 and 15 as well, is there a possibility these work placements could be extended maybe into 3rd years, kind of 14, 15-year-old age groups?
Thank you. So that's quite a big question, because there's quite a lot of legalities around how children and young people can access a work environment and the ages that it's appropriate. There's quite a lot of legal risk assessment that's required for a young person to go into a workplace to do work experience. What I would say is, though, that opportunities for work experience don't necessarily need to be a young person physically going to a place to do a job. There's an interfacing almost, or a place where there's a little bit more of blurred lines around visits to places where children can see things working, they can go on trips, we can have people into schools, and that's where we start to try and work at those age groups to try and encourage them to access these types of environments in a different way that might not be the sort of full force work experience placement where you're out in that type of environment. But it's very important for children and young people to see scientists, for example, if we're talking about STEM, as early as possible. So our primary schools would be encouraging STEM ambassadors in to talk to children about what science would look like. And we're trying to expose children and young people to all of these things as early as possible, so that it doesn't matter what age or what stage these children are, they're able to see themselves with that as a possible future. So it might not be as black and white as them being out on a work experience placement, but it certainly would be sort of a dipping their toe in the water and as exposing them to as many different experiences as possible within the constraints of what we're working with.
Okay, we'll now move to Councillor Aitchison.
Thanks, Provost. Good morning, Jill. I wonder if you could give us an overview on the educational psychology service, people using the service, staffing, basically what the service provides.
Certainly, sorry. I'm actually, if you don't mind, going to pass over to my colleague Deborah, who's sitting online, who's leads on the educational psychology service.
Okay, Deborah.
Good morning. Yes, happy to give you an overview. Educational psychology services, one of our central services that provides support to schools, to the wider service and to children and families in relation to additional support needs and in such a wide range of needs. I think initially I want to say it's important that educational psychology service works closely with our inclusion and wellbeing team. That includes our ASN advisors. We also have our outreach team, inclusion and wellbeing service, and our specialist service. So I just want to put it in the context of the wider range of services that are available to our families and our schools in relation to additional support needs. So our educational psychology service is led by Nick Bolshin. He's our principal educational psychologist. He works at a strategic level along with the senior leadership team. He works with our quality improvement team, and he obviously works very closely with his staff within the service. The educational psychology service have a range of roles, and it's important to note that one of the key functions of the educational psychology service is to build capacity with our schools, to upskill staff, to build confidence with staff, and that is ongoing and is reviewed on an annual basis as a link to their service improvement plan to identify the key priorities that the service requires from them and where they think the priorities are. So in relation to the number of children and families at our educational psychology service, one of their roles is the caseload they hold. So all of our educational psychology service staff have a caseload of individual children and families that they work with. Now, they have recently reviewed how they operate, and they work across the clusters within Falkirk to try and ensure they're delivering the most effective model possible. So in relation to last session, they had roughly 793 children and young people on their caseloads across the service. That had decreased roughly by 170 children from the year before. Now, you may ask that the number of children they're working with has decreased, yet we are saying that the level of need remains the same or increases. But again, it's important to note those range of models that they work within. So in relation to the staffing, they've got a core group of staff who are linked to caseloads. We also have individual staff who are linked to project work in specific areas that we know are a priority. So for example, we've got one senior educational psychologist who is linked closely to early years and has done a lot of work with our early years settings, but also delivered things like positive parenting groups and supporting families in specific ways. This year, we are focusing on supporting neurodiverse children and young people and also looking at trauma. So again, that changes on a yearly basis. So the caseload is important for individual families, as I mentioned. However, one of the other key areas, as I've also said, is the strategic work. That changes on an annual basis, is linked to project work, but also works alongside our other teams centrally. The other key role of the educational psychology service, which is vital to help build capacity or increase confidence of our staff, is the professional learning offer that they deliver. So specific training, and again, that's gathering feedback from schools, looking at the needs of our children and young people, and then delivering a training programme that is really relevant to that to support all our professionals. Over 1,000 delegates engaged, or actually almost 1,500 delegates engaged in training delivered by our educational psychology service last year. And again, at the moment, that is being offered and will be tailored throughout the year for this session. So I know I've given you a very quick flavour of there. So whilst we know caseload is important for our educational psychology service, the other key elements of delivery to build capacity and support the wider service is vital as well to use the resources effectively and as efficiently as possible. So that's some of the key areas that our educational psychology deliver, but important to ensure that we're realising how they work alongside the other central services to support some of our most vulnerable children, young people and families.
Thank you very much. Councillor Richardson.
Thanks, Deborah. I was really interested and informative. Can you tell me how, obviously, the amount of people accessing the service has gone down a bit this year? How long would it take someone from being identified to actually being assessed by an educational psychologist?
And yeah, that's a really relevant question, but I think we need to realise that when we speak about a caseload or individual children or a request for assistance being put in, not all children who are part of that request for assistance will be assessed by educational psychology service. So some of it might be advice given to the schools or to an individual professional. It might be linking with the parents to have a conversation with them, and depending on the reason for that referral, which may be about supporting them in their current educational setting, it might be supporting a request for a specialist placement or a change of placement for the children and young people. It will not always be a face-to-face assessment of a child or a young person by educational psychology service. So in relation to that initial contact, be it with a professional, be it with a parent, or be it with a school, that is reasonably prompt. I'm sorry, I don't have that specific number of days or weeks. If a further face-to-face assessment is required, that would be done in consultation with the school and planned to make sure the context is relevant to see the child or young person. But I think it is important to note that it may not necessarily be a face-to-face assessment that is delivered or given by the educational psychology service, depending on the reasons for the request for assistance. But in relation to an average time to have a face-to-face assessment with a child, I can get that information from you. I just can't tell you that now.
That would be very welcome, Deborah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Deborah and Councillor Richardson. We'll now go to Councillor Robertson, who's been waiting quite some time.
Thank you very much, Provost. Jill, I don't know if this question is for you or Mr. Reid. I note with interest that we're seeing improvements across the board in all our schools, but I'm just wondering if there are areas that need to be looked at. What's the process for challenging or addressing, let's say, any underperformance? And how is the school effectiveness measured and monitored?
Yeah, okay, so we have quite robust quality assurance and support and challenge processes in terms of how we look at, I'm assuming you're speaking initially about attainment?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So we have sectoral approaches to how we look at attainment. So across the different sectors, and I don't know if Deborah will want to come in after I've spoken, but generally we have a focus on some key dates in attainment. So for example, in primary, we gather achievement of a level at the end of P1, P4, P7 and S3. Sorry, that S3 is not primary, broad general education and S3. And in the senior phase, we look at attainment at 4th year, 5th year, 6th year and leavers data. So there are a range of touch points where we would engage with schools about what their data and their attainment looks like. So part of that is understanding the school of the story and what the data is telling us. So it's really important that you don't knee-jerk on a change in one bit of data over a period of time. What we have to look at is really understand the nuance and the pattern and the stories that are sitting underneath an attainment story. What we'll then do is we work very closely with schools around how we might look at improvement in these areas to improve on those stories. So for example, we might look at, and this is just a kind of an example that we're looking at, it might be that we say there's a school where their 6th year most able attainment isn't as strong as it needs to be, and that's been the case for 4 or 5 years. What we then might start to look at is say, well, what are the underlying reasons why that might be the case? We would then work with schools around what their learning and teaching would look like, what their pace and challenge of their learning and teaching would look like, but also around what their curriculum might look like. Now, That's a partnership working with our schools, and that's where we're working towards, is really working very, very closely with schools to be really honest and open about data at given points, and really discuss what the improvement agenda needs to look like moving forward as a school. So in terms of that, there is a big wide range of data that we would use to understand that performance. So attainment data would just be one of those things. So I spoke about P1, 4, 7, S3, and then senior phase data, 4th year, 5th year, 6th year, and leavers. There's also things like how a school is inspected, or the inspection outcomes of a school. There's also some softer things around what their tracking and monitoring data might look like. So for example, in secondary school, I said to you, third year is probably the first point we've got formally reported data, but we do look at tracking and monitoring data in first year and second year as well. So there is a really rich environment for data within our schools, and our function is to really get alongside schools, work with schools to really understand what that picture looks like across an extensive range of measures, to really focus on what the improvement needs to be. And then we within our service say, well, collectively, what does that messaging look like across our estate? Is there an area where we need to focus strategically on curriculum because we notice the 6th year isn't as strong as it needs to be? So do we as a service need to try and say, well, how do we respond to this? So you'll have local school by school responses to some of the data that's sitting there, but we'll also have sort of strategic responses at a local authority level to try and support a bigger messaging. So I think the value for us is around our quality assurance processes and our really robust look at the entire range of data that we've got. And again, I think although we can't comment on it publicly at the moment because we've not got to our reporting stage in terms of our data, we've obviously just been through a process of SQA exam results, and what I would say is that already we're starting to see very positive signs about that high quality work that we're doing and the close working relationships we're developing with schools around the improvement agenda, particularly on attainment, but wider on tracking and monitoring school inspection as well. Sorry, Deborah, I don't know if you want to add in anything specifically around primary or if I've covered.
I think you've covered most, Jill. I think it's important to say the same principles. We work with our central officers, as do secondary, to look at really robust quality assurance processes where we are challenging schools and we are challenging ourselves as a service to look at the attainment. So obviously we collate the data at the end of the year on achievement of a level across the 3 areas within literacy and numeracy. We look at then what the data is telling us as a service, but we have a programme of activities within our schools throughout the whole school year. We will look at the predictions for data, the data as it progresses throughout the year, and then what the final attainment data is telling us across, as Jill says, primary 1, 4 and 7. We look very carefully at trends, which informs our targeted improvement work, for example, in relation to the Scottish Equity Funding. So, for example, if the primary 7 numeracy data is telling us there is a dip there and there needs to be targeted work, then that's where we will focus on to help improvement in specific areas, whilst not taking away the wider improvement agenda. Every primary school has 3 visits from quality improvement officers, as well as full primary partnership meetings where all primary heads come together with a particular focus on strategic improvement, the first one being in September on attainment in particular. We also have set up quads where primary heads come together to challenge each other, to scrutinise each other and to support collaborative activity across their schools, again with that very strong focus on improvement. So the systems have really been focused on. We've got to ensure there are robust processes to quality assure what's going on in our schools. But again, very similar principles and areas for improvement across both sectors.
Okay, thanks very much, Deborah. I'll now go to John Reid.
Yeah, thank you. Now, I'm just going to add a couple of comments to that, just to highlight and underline the fact that I think every single person in the education service wants the best outcomes for our children and young people. But the way that a council improves is because individual schools improve. And individual schools improve when head teachers work with individual class teachers to improve what's being delivered in the classroom. So as much as there's a big focus on quality assurance and tracking and monitoring, the best way of making sure things improve is by providing the right support to our teachers and our support staff, giving them the tools they need to do their job, and supporting that with a really robust programme of professional learning. And that's a really important point. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Okay, thanks very much. I'd just like to ask you about the ELCs. They've been going for a few years now. So are there any indication if that's affecting improving performance? You know, what are the outcomes? How do we measure the benefit of it? Deborah.
Can I pass over to Deborah if that's okay?
Okay. Deborah.
Of course you can. In relation to curriculum for excellence, early level starts within the early years setting, so we don't just start a different curriculum in primary one. So we already are tracking children within early level in a range of different ways across our early learning settings. What we've been working really hard to do is ensure there's really effective transition, and we're building on prior levels of engagement, prior levels of achievement within our early years, moving into primary one. We know there's really rich and valuable learning going on within our early years settings. It's captured probably in different ways in relation to school. So the assessment that's used, that responsive planning to work with individual children in early years. But curriculum for excellence starts at age 3. We build on the learning that's taking place within our early years settings, and actually we know we need to learn from it. For example, play is the way in primary one and play pedagogy. We're considering our approaches to learning and teaching at early years that are really building on the learning that's taking place, and we're using that assessment information and that really solid transition information that's passed on from our early years settings into primary one to ensure that our children are on track to achieve early level within by the end of primary one, but really thinking about our teaching approaches and that professional learning that John's spoken about, that is really providing continuity for children as they move across the settings. So it doesn't appear to be a completely different sector, and we're not giving any consideration to what's came before.
Okay, thank you for that. I just wanted to ask a bit about the interrupted learner service. You know, at the cottage. I visited there a couple of times, and I just wondered, is there any information on how these kids are doing and how ones are going to the college, or just how well they're, how it's improving their lives? Because I know they do a fantastic job.
I'm going to do the same again if that's okay, Deborah.
Deborah.
Of course, I don't have the statistics to sit here and tell you what the outcomes are for the children and young people, but there is a very strong focus on positive destinations. That engagement with college is a strong feature of our interrupted learner service. There is a strong focus on developing literacy, numeracy and well-being. What we are working hard to do is link the interrupted learner service really closely with our catchment schools to ensure that offer for our children and young people is as wide as it can be, and their opportunities are not limited by not attending school. So there's a lot of work going on there to celebrate the success of engagement of the young people who attend the interrupted learner service, but then to ensure how that offer of achievement and qualifications is as wide as it should be and as relevant as it should be for the young people who are engaging with interrupted learner service. But there is quite a strong programme of engagement across interrupted learner service and the college, starting not just in senior phase to build that engagement of children and young people. But again, we can provide further information if that would be useful.
Thanks very much, Deborah. Councillor Forrest.
Thanks, Convener. It's not a question. It's actually about the report leaflet. Much has been made of it already by several of our members, and I just want to say personally thank you for it, because it's excellent, especially section 10, which no one's mentioned, the glossary. See, everybody going for it now. And the explanations and the abbreviations of the acronyms. Thank you for that. But the thing that gets me most about it is actually looking at the kids in it. The photographs of the children, they're very obviously engaged with what they're doing. And the smiles says it all. So I think it's a lovely piece of work. And thank you to all concerned.
Thanks very much, Councillor
Thank you.
Forrest. I'm sure that was very welcome. John Reid?
That is very welcome. Thank you, Provost. I think pictures sometimes are 1,000 times more powerful than stats and information in the report. So thank you for that. I just wanted to add a couple comments about the interrupted learner service. If my memory serves me correctly, last year there were 7 or 8 leavers, and almost all of them moved into a positive destination, and as Deborah highlighted there, through strong links with particularly Forth Valley College and individually planned pathways. Now, there's a whole host of work that goes on in our schools with young people who are whose learning is interrupted, but may not access the support specifically from the cottage on the interrupted learner service. So the young people who get support from that particular service are small in number, but that's replicated right across all of our mainstream schools. One of the things that we're doing to move forward to provide a better service and to manage it a bit more strategically is that we're currently advertising for a new permanent head teacher of our current inclusion and wellbeing service, and that person, when the recruitment process concludes, obviously will have responsibility for the redesign of the inclusion and wellbeing service as it prepares to move to the Dawson campus, but they will also have responsibility for interrupted learners across the council and for identifying those young people who may not be accessing any support from their school or from the interrupted learner service for whatever reason that is. So one of the things that we're hoping to do in Falkirk is to also establish a virtual school, if you like, and that's completely different from all the virtual learning that we offer across our schools at the moment. But it's more additional targeted support for young people who find it difficult to engage with education for whatever reason. So we're on that, and we're reviewing the service and strengthening it with that particular move. So we'll keep you updated about that.
Thanks very much, John. We'll now go to Councillor Kerr.
Thanks. John, I'm not sure the first part of this question, I don't think maybe is aimed at you more. Since John's here, I'll ask it. How many people, or how many children do we send to St Modern School from Falkirk to Stirling? What's the cost of that? That's the main part, the first part of the question. But the second is, how do we manage their attainment, measure their attainment, and do we support them in any other way outside school educationally?
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. So,
Yeah. Okay, Jill, are you going to answer that? Okay, on you go.
sorry, no, John, you go.
Okay, well, you can maybe add to this answer. We send around, or we transport annually around 200 children to St Modun's High School. And of course, Stirling Council would receive the funding for placing them in St Modun's High School. It doesn't cost us anything other than the transport to send them to St Modun's. I think we spend around 240,000 annually to transport the children to St Modun's, and all Denny cluster pupils who are RC baptised and living within the St Patrick's RC primary school area currently fall within the St Modun's catchment area, and so they don't require policing requests to attend. Their and so pupils automatically transfer to St Modans at the end of their P7 at St Patrick's. Now, we do exactly the same with St Patrick's as we do with any of our other primary schools in terms of the support and how we track and how we monitor their attainment. But the final outcomes for what they achieve during their time in secondary school and the destinations they move into will be taken care of by Stirling Council. And so their attainment, their final attainment in terms of exams and things, will show up in the Stirling data and not our data. I think it's a historic arrangement. St Modans secondary provision served all of Stirling and Clackmannanshire denominational primaries, as well as St Pat's and Denny. And that school relies on out of authority pupils for its long-term viability. In terms of Falkirk, we would not have the capacity at the moment to accommodate all of the additional pupils if there were to be a change to that. So at the present time, we're not considering any catchment changes for Falkirk. In line with the arrangements that's well established and that works well at the moment. Clackmannanshire Council does a similar thing, and it transports all of their denominational secondary pupils to St Modans High School as well. So I hope that clarifies the position for you.
Okay, thanks, John. Councillor Kelly.
Thanks, John. So we don't actually measure the attainment of these pupils. Is that what you're telling me there?
Yeah, we measure it whilst they're at St Patrick's, and just like we do with any of our other primary schools, and we provide the same support, and the same interventions, and the same resources. But once they go to St Modans, they're the responsibility of Stirling Council, and they fit in with whatever it is they're doing. It's not our responsibility at that point.
Okay, thanks, Sean.
Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll go to Councillor Sinclair, who's a portfolio holder for education, to give his comments.
Thanks, Provost, and thanks for the opportunity. I don't intend to say much. I think it's been a very comprehensive overview of the SQR this morning, and for that might not be in the glossary, that the Standards and Quality Report. Apologies for using a TLA there. I think what we have in Falkirk, and it's evident from this report, is a vibrant, engaging and innovative education service. The outcomes that are contained within here, and actually one of the outcomes that really kind of stuck out to me was the increase in attendance for care experience young people, but also the increase of 4.17% from 22-23 in quintile 1 pupils. Those outcomes are the result of an incredibly huge amount of work put in by pupils, staff, parents, families, communities. We have an inordinate amount of work goes on in our education service. And this report here that's in front of us today is a snapshot of all of that vibrancy right across our service. My absolute thanks goes to Jill and her team, John, the whole education service right across, but also to the pupils for engaging, and also to their families for their support to our education. So education is a very hot and emotional topic at times, and sometimes we might not agree on things, but I think what is abundantly clear from this report and everything that I see is that our education service and every member of staff is relentlessly focused on outcomes for children and giving our children and young people in Falkirk the absolute best start in life they completely deserve. Thank you, Provost.
Thanks very much, Councillor Sinclair. I think everybody here would like to pay their thanks to all the teachers, staff, everybody involved in education. I think they're doing a wonderful job, and you can clearly see that from the SQR report. The outcomes are going up, and we're trying to look at everybody, ASM provision, and everybody needs support all the way through, try and get the best outcomes for them. And I think we're achieving that. It's how you keep it there that's a difficult thing, but I think we've got that covered as well by the the continuous professional learning, by the teaching staff, all the additional training that goes in all the time. And sometimes we underestimate the level of commitment teachers, not just in the school, but out with school time as well. And as Councillor Sinclair said, it's the communities as well, not the parents that engage, and it's the whole collective package that gets these outcomes that we're looking for. So I'd just like to thank everybody for their efforts, and let's continue that. So I think it's been quite a thorough discussion on it. I think everybody's engaged, and thank everybody for their contributions. So we'll now just close the meeting, and thanks very much. I hope the rest of your day goes well.